right. And we'll get started in just a minute when everybody gets in here. And while we're waiting, if you would like to put in the chat box where you are coming to us from, we would love to see that. Great. All right. Well, I'm going to get started with our introductions. So welcome to EIHR's 2023 webinar series, Voices of Children and Youth. I am Kim Klett, Deputy Executive Director of the Educators Institute for Human Rights. We're so happy to see many of you joining us today from various places around the world. And again, if you haven't already, feel free to put where you are joining us from in the chat box. Today, Matthew Good, our staff librarian, will be joining me as a co-host, and he'll be helping me run the chat box. So please put questions there as they arise. I'd like to begin by telling you just a little bit about EIHR. Taking lessons from the Holocaust and other historic human rights violations, EIHR develops teaching materials, convenes training workshops and summits, and supports educator networks to give secondary students a deeper understanding of how egregious conflicts arise and evolve, how justice is served, and most importantly, how we can prevent future atrocities. EIHR provides these quality programs at no cost to viewers. Please consider making a donation to help us continue these programs. We will put the donation link for our website into the chat box, eihr.org/donate. Please also visit our website at www.eihr.org to find our many resources. This year's theme for our webinar series was voted on by our viewers, and we're excited to bring you a rich variety of speakers. It is often said that a society can be measured by the way it treats its weakest members, and that often includes children. We want to bring that focus in this series and not only bring awareness, but also look at ways you can get involved. We will be putting the links for January's webinar in the chat box so you can register. We will be joined in January on the 14th by artist Nora Krug, who has a new book on Ukraine. And we also will send a follow-up email that will include the recording from today and any of the links that we're sharing in the chat box. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land where EIHR's office resides. EIHR respectfully acknowledges the Piscataway and Nacotchtank or Anacostan people and the elders, both past and present, throughout the generations who have stewarded the land where EIHR gathers. And now I'd like to introduce today's webinar, History and Peace Education, the War Childhood Museum Method. I'm really excited about this webinar because the museum is truly like no other. I remember visiting it in 2017 for the first time and really being struck by its poignancy. Utilizing everyday artifacts from the Siege of Sarajevo, along with testimonies from those who were children at the time, the museum looks at war from a completely different perspective than any other museum. We are thrilled today to have Merima Ražanica, who has worked with the War Childhood Museum since 2017. In her role of Educational Activities Coordinator over the years, she has developed and co-developed new educational materials for the museum's Peace Education program and worked with over 10,000 children, youth, and adults, facilitating discussions, holding teacher seminars, and teaching about war, childhood, tolerance, migration, discrimination, diversity, and acceptance. Being herself a person whose childhood was affected by the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, she is deeply intrinsically motivated in her work. She is interested in utilizing alternative methodologies and perspectives in learning and teaching about armed conflicts and their long-term effect on communities. She is dedicated to exploring interactive and participatory forms of remembrance that go beyond traditional memory practices. So again, we will have a Q&A afterwards, but as Merima is presenting, please feel free to drop any questions into the chat box. And Merima, they are all yours.
Thank you, Kim, very much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here today for a webinar in which I will tell you a bit more on how the War Childhood Museum creates and how it implements activities with children in this sensitive topic of war and armed conflicts in general. So I will be sharing my presentation with you. So let me just put it on your screens. And I would like to start off by telling you a little bit about the War Childhood Museum itself and how it came to be, as I'm sure some of you don't know a lot about it, even if you've heard of bits here and there. So the War Childhood Museum is an independent museum, and it's exclusively dedicated to presenting the experience of childhoods affected by armed conflicts. The museum developed from the War Childhood book, and you can see it behind me. This book is a collection of memories of people who grew up during the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so whose childhoods have been affected by the war, actually, in a broader sense. So it was opened in 2017 after 7 years of the work on the project, after a process of preparation, development of the research methodology, and setting up of the permanent exhibition. So today, the museum's collection counts close to 6,000 personal items, exhibits, and hundreds of hours of video testimonies from over 17 different conflict and post-conflict zones in the world. Because, as I said, the museum was opened in 2017, but its story is a bit older than that. It began a little earlier with the War Childhood book. So in 2010, Jasminko Halilovic, who is the founder of the museum, decided to ask his peers, people like him, who were children during the siege of Sarajevo, to answer this question that you can see on your screens now. And he posted this question on the website he created solely for that purpose. He limited the responses to the question to 160 characters, and he received more than 1,500 responses from individuals whose childhoods were affected by the war. So the short memories that they shared have kind of shed light on to different aspects of this multi-layered and complex experience, covering topics from wartime schooling, finding food, finding shelters, personal losses, wounding, everyday life, play, humanitarian aid, and so many more perspectives and from this broad experience. So these memories were shared from a very personal perspective that somehow bring history to life. Here are several memories from the book. I wanted my own loaf to eat all in one go if I felt like it. Vedran, born in 1983, had shared this memory in the book. I remember the night Dad said, "Mom is dead." I remember the words, "Your dad is dead." Damn war. So after the publication of this book in 2013, the author actually came to the realization that many people have also kept personal items, objects from their war childhoods and not just memories. And these items were connected to this period of their lives and to certain memories they had, certain emotions they have felt throughout this period, certain experiences they went through and that made them in a way. So those items were of great emotional value for them, and the stories that were connected, the memories that were connected to these items represented a concrete historical event an armed conflict, but through their personal stories about how that historical event has affected them personally. So these were objects that they saved, like toys or clothes or letters, diaries, photographs, drawings, a wallet, a canister, a piece of clothing, an earring. So anything that was important for them and that was a part of their life and a significant part of it connected to an event, they have saved these objects. So it became clear at that point that there was a need for a permanent space that will preserve the countless objects and personal memories, histories, stories that individuals have saved and that they were willing to share about their childhood spent in the war or affected by war. So even more, it became clear that this should be an inclusive platform in a sense that experiences of children from different parts of the world would be shared through their unique voices and perspectives, because unfortunately, armed conflicts have happened before and in different parts of the world, and they're happening today in different parts of the world. So the War Childhood Museum aims to share, serve as a platform for all of their voices to be shared and heard. And the museum, after realizing this potential, was envisioned as a space that will preserve these objects that people have saved and the stories that are connected to them, personal stories, and that will share them with the public with the aim of educating as wide audience as possible about the consequences of armed conflict on children and their lives by presenting this multi-layeredness and the complexity of their experiences, while at the same time also pointing to the children's resilience and strength. The museum as a space presents a unique perspective that is often overlooked or neglected or not presented at all. Unfortunately, it's the perspective of children and youth in armed conflict. Very often when one reads, watches documentary, or learns from history books about a war or a conflict, armed conflict, one is encountered with the perspective of adults, be it adult civilians, active participants in the conflict, politicians, historians, but very rarely do we have the opportunity to see a child's view of the war. And very often the possibility of owning their stories and narratives is taken away from children, and they are presented either exclusively as victims or as passive observers who do not have the ability to understand, to reflect, to discuss, or even think in a productive way about their experiences. And even years after the events, they are told so because they are considered unreliable witnesses. So for the above reasons, this kind of perspective of children shared by the museum collection is of immense importance, especially for the educational activities of the museum, which are one of the three pillars of our work, in addition to the research and exhibition activities. Going through our exhibition, children can very easily relate to the themes and personal stories shared by their peers whose childhoods were or still are affected by armed conflicts. Those stories become so much more tangible and easier to relate to when they are shared by their peers and through the story or memory of a personal object that they can see in front of them physically standing in the exhibition area, be it in our permanent exhibition or our traveling exhibitions. Educational activities of the War Childhood Museum were introduced with the firm belief that starting an open, an age-appropriate and constructive dialogue about war and peace with children and young people, and investing in their knowledge about nonviolent conflict resolution can fundamentally actually transform the world into a more peaceful place in the long term. Our educational activities are based in peace building and peacekeeping workshops and education for nonviolent conflict resolution. And each of the activities is actually based in the voices of children whose childhoods were affected by armed conflicts or are affected by them that are part of our collection. A large part of our educational activities is focused on the topics of tolerance, diversity, anti-discrimination, which I mentioned. earlier. Anything that the War Childhood Museum does is adhering strictly to many protocols and books of rules, which are there to ensure children's safety when interacting with either the collection or any of the activities, especially activities that we design for them, in which they will come into contact with the collection itself. And all of the materials and all of our procedures relating to this are in accordance with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And they're there to make sure that emotional and psychological well-being of children is preserved, and also they are there to prevent traumatization and re-traumatization, especially when it comes to the activities that are realized directly in the permanent space of the museum, because coming from a context in which the Bosnia and Herzegovina itself is a post-conflict society, we are well aware that some children can have secondary traumatization relating to their parents' experiences or their broader family's experience. So we are very careful when working with children in any context, especially in live workshops at the museum. So in that regard, we take many measurements, like sending the info letters, including the whole community actually that the child comes from, including their school as well as their family, into the process of visiting the museums and interacting with our materials. So we have info letters prepared for both the children and their parents, but also for the coordinator, the teacher that will bring them to the museum, and also so it's parents and children and the coordinators. So sorry, those are the three info letters that are sent out in preparation to visit our museum and to take part in our educational activities. There are also preparation materials. These are some kinds of prepared and in detailed written materials that are aimed to prepare the children to interact with our collection or to prepare them to take part in some of the activities in the museum. So these are the materials that teachers use prior to coming to the museum for 45 minutes or a bit longer or shorter, depending on the age group, and they carry out these activities in their schools. And when children come to the museum, they are well prepared to deal with the topic and to deal with the activities. And there are also materials for reflection similar to these ones after they have seen our exhibition and after they have taken part in the workshop at the museum. So there's again 45 or more or less time slots that teachers or educators implement in schools after they visit the museum, so that they can have this very well-rounded and serious approach to tackling this topic in general. Just a second. Growing up in post-conflict societies, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina or others, one in the region and in the world as well, it leaves children with the heavy burden of having to deal with a past that they have not witnessed and been a part of. And in many cases, they are expected not to oppose their community's attitudes and narratives regarding the war. So children living in countries without war are also heavily affected by armed conflicts happening throughout the world, as we can witness today. They have difficulties with their mental health. They are exposed to visual images and information that they cannot fathom or understand. They can feel unsupported, excluded from conversation, overwhelmed and helpless in relation to the topic of war and to what they have been exposed to. So they are also often told that they do not have the right to reflect and discuss this topic. For example, for the children that are living in the post-conflict societies, because they were not alive to witness some of the historical events. But on the other hand, in a post-conflict society, they're expected to bear the burden of their families' experiences, shared stories, the scenarios that are vivid in their memories from the past, and all of this influences the children's attitudes and behaviors towards others. So therefore, we considered, the War Childhood Museum considered that it's important that through educational work, the museum carries out, through the educational work that the museum carries out, children are able to acquire certain knowledge about nonviolent conflict resolution, open and constructive dialogue, critical thinking, and also to allow them to go through emotionally intelligent approaches to dealing with personal stories. Therefore, through our educational activities, we place great focus on developing sets of skills that will enable children to recognize their own attitudes, for example, their own emotions, and their own roles in this process of building a sustainable and stable peace, or to reaching justice. We aim to offer the teachers and professors, as well as educators in a broader sense, the tools to empower children on that path as well. So it's both for children and youth, as well as for educators in a broader sense. So it was with this guiding idea that we also created the Peace and Justice Education Resource Center, which was conceived as a comprehensive and inclusive free resource center for peace and justice education that's intended for teachers and educators, as a starting point that connects the personal items that are preserved in the collection, in the War Childhood Museum's collection, and which were saved by individuals around the world from their wartime childhoods. So it serves to connect this and their teaching practices of history, of democracy, of geography, of language, literature, and it serves to integrate them to allow to create actually the possibility of a complete and holistic approach to peace education through the proposed activity plans that I will tell you more about in a few minutes. So the center is primarily intended for teachers and educators in primary and secondary schools around the world. Whether you have a lot of experience or you have little, this center aims to serve as a source of main or additional activity plans that you can implement with students in schools or other educational spaces that are intended for learning in a broader sense. The content on the center is very user-friendly and it's comprehensible and accessible, and it's aimed to support the daily practice of teachers and educators, taking into mind their busy schedules and offering all downloadable materials, printouts, and detailed plans of implementation of all of the proposed activities. So the sources contained in this Peace and Justice Education Resource Center will be useful for teachers of history, civic education, geography, as I mentioned, literature, languages, but also for teachers in the fields of other humanity and social sciences, as well as, for example, arts as well. Each of the developed activity plans in this resource center is connected to an object, an item from Saved by Children, which is now a part of the collection, the War Childhood Museum collection, and whose childhood has been affected by armed conflict around the world. So each activity plan is connected to either one object or more of them, and to the personal stories connected to those objects. So this is the basis of each of these activity plans. So this makes the activity plans relatable for children and youth of different age groups and from different regions in the world, as the stories in connection to the items from the collection come from different parts of the world. We have objects in our collection that come from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Palestine, from Ukraine, Eritrea, Kashmir, Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia. We have objects in our collection that are connected to the Second World War in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, as well. These are just some of the examples. So the suggested activity plans, they vary significantly in themes and topics, but they all have to do with teaching practice in the broadest sense of the world. There are suggested activities that include working on, for example, creating timelines, which is very important for example, in teaching history. Some of them are connected to conducting group or individual research, by students to creative expression in the form of journaling, writing essays. Some of them are using methodologies of drama and performance in education as well. Cooperative learning is a part of it. Discussions, debates, on the other hand, creating video materials, interviewing their parents, their communities, community members, to be more precise, brainstorming, and so on. So these are just some of the examples of kinds of activities and methodologies used in the activity plans. For those of the teachers and educators who are less experienced with such methodologies, there are also in these activities links where you can learn more about some of these methodologies so that you can implement them a bit easier while implementing in class. Teachers and educators can choose to use items from the War Childhood Museum collection that fit into what they already teach about war and conflict, because on the website there is a one portion which is just with the resources from the collection. So objects, photographs of the objects from the collection, and personal stories or diary excerpts that you can connect to the materials that you already have, for example, and use it as a hook or as a starter of the activity. Each activity plan can be used separately, or it can be used in a series of activities that together provide a deeper insight into war and conflict, and especially insight into children's experience of war and conflict. The one of the most basic methodologies used in the activity plans is the object-based learning methodology. And what you can see on your screen now is one example of one part of the activity plans. And this activity plan is connected to stereotypes, and children, for example, are asked to brainstorm some of the jokes that they have heard or have used previously, and each child for themselves writes 2 or 3 jokes, and they create a pile of many jokes, and teacher then divides the one that use stereotypes and the ones that they don't use, and after that he or she just takes the one that have stereotypes in them, and then children are divided into groups and are given smaller piles from this big pile of jokes, and they have to recognize the one joke that they think creates the most harm, and that they find that can influence somebody's life in a very negative way, and they have to answer these questions. Why? Give as many reasons as you can why people might use stereotypes. Examples of how the use of stereotypes can harm people, and especially taking consideration of the joke that they chose, and what's the solution to this? How can we limit the use of stereotypes? So this is just one example. But as I said, the main methodology used in the activities is the object-based learning. I would just like to say a bit about object-based learning, since it's the basis for all of our educational activities, not just for the Peace and Justice Education Resource Center. Object-based learning methodology can be defined as a form of active and experiential learning, in which students are asked to actively immerse themselves in the works of art, for example, other artifacts, archival materials, or digital representations of unique objects. So this type of learning goes beyond traditional learning because it requires students to observe, to think, and to work with real or virtual objects. The advantage of object-based learning, among others, is that it provides a visual link to a topic or to an event, for example, from the past firsthand. So this, I can give an example from our collection. We have a number of diary excerpts, we have a number of diaries in our collection from different parts of the world. Most of them are from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia, because that's where a big part of our collection is from in general. And many of these diaries are in them, they are diary entries that are directly describing how the individual who was writing the diary recollected some important date, some important event that happened throughout the war, the start of the war, the peace marches before the war, or some bigger massacres or human rights violations that happened. They are directly described through the perspective of children. So it creates kind of a direct link to these young people who are using this resource. Also, object-based learning provides information that is less abstract, that is less distant to students, and it can trigger many different types of interactive learning. Let me just see, I have seen some that I cannot go back to seeing the chat. Okay, I hope it comes back. Oh, here it is. I saw some messages there. I just want to see if something is about what I'm talking about now. Is there a link directly to the diary activities? So yes, I think one of the documents now published has a link to some of the excerpts from that are from the War Childhood Museum's objects collections, objects that are in the War Childhood Museum's collection. So this was from Colleen. Okay. And also one more advantage of object-based learning is that it helps students to focus on one or more objects and to better understand the layered meaning that this object can have for those who made it, who used it, who owned it. And we have, for example, in our collection, a set of coloring crayons that has been not used. They seem quite new. And we asked children when they see it to, for example, try and guess if these crayons were given to somebody during the war and at the start of the war, why this person hasn't used them. And then children brainstorm about the reasons why somebody might have not used these crayons. So they look quite new, and during the war, there are not a lot of resources. And after that, they find out by reading the personal story that actually the girl, Layla, whose these crayons are, has not used them because she was afraid that the war might take much, much longer, and that then she would not get another ones in humanitarian aid, and she would be left without crayons. So it helps children dig deeper into the use of the object, the value of the object, and also to the circumstances relating to the object's history. Object-based learning also provides an ideal opportunity to initiate group and class discussion. It shows how the same subject can be interpreted in several different ways, and I have an example for this. We have a swing, a wooden swing, handmade before the war for a girl from, I think, Sarajevo. And on the swing, there is a small metal bell, and it was added. It looks like it was added by somebody. It was not an integral part of the swing. And before we read the story with children, we would ask them, why do you think somebody hanged a bell on the swing? And they would brainstorm. They would use multi-perspectivity to try to recognize the reason behind doing so. And after they brainstorm about the ideas, why somebody might have done that, we will read to them that this bell was added so that the mother of the child can actually hear when her child is in the swing, because they didn't use the swing at their weekend house as it was intended, but actually in the basement of their building, where there were many, many people, and her mother couldn't keep an eye on her all the time. So the bell was a sign for her that her daughter was actually in the swing, and the story, the memory connected to this object that is on display at the museum is called the safest hiding place. in the besieged Sarajevo. So that's one more example on how objects can be used to as a triggers to start off the activity, as hooks, as brainstorming starters, and so much more. And they can start off learning from a much more interesting point than just reading about some historical facts, which are of course important, but they're not always the greatest of hooks for children and youth when tackling these topics. The Peace and Justice Education Resource Center was launched around a month and a half ago. So it's in its starting phase. In addition to some basic information, this educational center consists of objects that come from a wide collection of objects and video testimonies, as I mentioned at the start, and a certain number of initial proposed activity plans that take these objects as a starting point, which will be expanded over time, and new content is to be added continuously. Selected items vary from different diary entries, as I said, through letters, to items that provided comfort to children during the war. Like the objects, the proposed activity plans are also varied. Most of the resources in this center have been created by War Childhood Museum affiliated educational experts and partners. The manager of our educational programs is Baron van Driel, who has for 30 years worked with the Anne Frank House as director of their international educational activities. So he has launched this together with our educational team a month and a half ago, and has gained trust and partnership of many other educational experts to create first of the documents launched in the website. There's also Teachers for Teachers section, which is going to be launched very soon in the next 15 days. It's a collection of activity plans developed by teachers around the world for other teachers. And it is set to be launched, as I said, mid-December, but it's also going to be continuously updated. So if there is a special interest in those who are here with us tonight, you can follow our work, and there will be opportunity to become a contributor to this section of the resource center. This education center, this education center is not intended as a finished product. It will be constantly updated, and while new activity plans will be created continuously based on new items in the VCM collection, also a feedback on the activity plans will allow us to upgrade and make the activities fit more to the needs of the teachers and children throughout the world. Each activity plan is intended for implementation in a certain time slot. So there are one-time 45-minute activity plans, and there's also a five times 45 minutes activity plans that are a bit longer and dig deeper into some of the topics. And they're all for a certain age group. There are different materials for different age groups. The first batch that was published is for the group of 13 to 18-year-olds. And each document has defined goals and outcomes of the proposed activities, so that teachers or educators can recognize the elements in the first section of each activity, so that they can right away see if the material will or will not fit into the current stage of covering certain topics that they are covering with their class, or the specific goals that they want to achieve in their work. So you can see it here on this slide now, that each document, before you go into the document through the download activity plan PDF, you can observe some of the most important basic information about it, how much time you need to go through it, what's the age group that it's intended for, what are the main objectives, some of the main objectives, what are the materials that you will need. And there are also some themes, emotions and feelings, types of objects and methodologies. I would like to say a bit about this as well. So each of these activities has 4 categories that are defined within it. So topics, one is the topics or themes that the students and teachers deal with if they use a certain proposed activity. These are the topics that are in connection with the stories and objects, which are the basis of the material within the document. There is also emotions and feelings that are excerpted from each of the materials. So this is connected to emotions and feelings that could be evoked or processed while implementing the activity plan. These can be both emotions and feelings connected to the object and personal stories that are the basics of the document, but they can be also emotions evoked through utilizing specific parts of the activity plans, for example, through discussion, brainstorming, self-reflection activity that is a part of the activity plan, and so on. There's also a type of object, that's used in the activity plan. This will show to the teachers or educators directly which type of object, I keep reading the documents here, which type of object is utilized with this activity plan. And this means the object from the collection of the museum. And then there's also methodologies outlined. So these are the methodologies that are used within the activity plan. Very soon, the users of the Peace and Justice Education Resource Center will be able to use the filtering option to find exactly the material they need. And they will be able to search educational materials according to the desired subtopic, for example. So they would be able to write fleeing, escape, and every day during the war, and they would get all of the activity plans that are connected to these topics or that touch up on these topics in any way. They will be able to search educational materials according to emotions. For example, if they want to tackle certain emotion in connection to some topic they are covering in their class, they would be able to write down, for example, support and connection and search, and they would get all of the materials that are in any way covering these emotions or dealing with them throughout the activity plan. And they would also be able to do that for objects. So if you type out toy, it would give you all of the materials, activity plans that use toys as starting points. So to kind of bring this to a bit of a close or a conclusion, the main strength of the personal objects and memories in conversation about history lies in their power to create a human connection between historical events and those who witness them and those who learn about them from a distance, be it a temporal distance or a physical distance. In the entire educational process, when learning about historical events, children's attention is mainly focused on learning numbers, learning about years, the statistics, and while relying on facts is extremely important. Using only this approach in teaching makes history abstract. It makes it completely unrelated to the lives of the children and young people to some extent. The content is not relatable to them. They experience that the content in the textbook does not concern them, quotation marks, because it happens or happened to someone, sometime, somewhere who is not me, quotation marks again. But with the power of objects to make history more tangible and relatable, and with the power of personal stories and memories connected to them, learning history becomes a process of making connections, a process of developing a well-rounded, integrative knowledge that is acquired in a way that also develops empathy and a deeper understanding. For children from the geographical region of former Yugoslavia, if I can put it like that, the museum has a special importance, the physical space, in learning about the history of conflicts, because when they are in the museum, they learn about history that is very much still alive in the stories shared with them by their parents and other family members, and they are contested equally in different communities in this region. So in that sense, the War Childhood Museum represents something personal for them, something close to home, something that has the potential to deeply influence them, awaken their emotions, initiate deep and difficult conversations in their families, initiate intergenerational dialogue, and encourage change. We believe that the War Childhood Museum is and will be equally relatable to children throughout the world through the use of this Peace and Justice Education Resource Center, because we're striving towards making this resource center as inclusive and as diverse as possible by adding activity plans that are based in objects and stories from children from all over the world, so that teachers in Ukraine can use our materials and have stories about the courageous and girl Sophia, who joined a youth activist group in 2014 with the rise of violence and war in the eastern part of Ukraine. And she can teach about history while using an example of a brave teenage girl who can inspire children in the classroom by giving them an example of how they can have a role in building peace and making them feel less how do you say that in English, helpless. So that would be it from me, and for the end I will just read the personal story from our collection. I found this dress in an abandoned Sarajevo apartment in 1993. Its bright color flirted with the forbidden, considering that we, as citizens of besieged Sarajevo, were constant targets for the snipers who hid in the surrounding hills. And as people fending to their own lives, dressed in subtle pastel tones, I wore this bright blue dress. It was a symbol of defiance and my will to live. Emina, born in 1976. So that would be it. I am going to stop sharing now. And thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Great, Merima, thank you so much. I just want to mention again that the museum, what Yasminko and your team have all created and worked on over all these years is just so different. As you were talking, I was thinking about how other museums really kind of put children by the wayside. You know, they might not even be mentioned in other museums. And so I love that children are at the forefront, because I was thinking, you at the beginning of your talk, you said that children are often seen as unreliable witnesses. And yet so many of these, people who were children during the Holocaust, for example, have vivid memories that, like you said, through diaries or just their memories can really keep that history alive and maybe even tell a different part of the history that we didn't consider. So this is bravo to all of you. It's wonderful. Colleen is saying outstanding resources. They absolutely are. If anybody has questions, we have about 10 more minutes. We'd love to answer any questions, but as always, I have a lot to ask. One of the questions, you mentioned that you have artifacts from other countries that have come into your collections now. Do you notice anything that stands out as different from, where they're coming from, or are they just kind of all similar because they're childhood memories?
When it comes to that, I'm not a researcher, but I do have a knowledge about many of the stories from our collection. So I will try to give my perception, to give my perspective. Of course, the War Childhood Museum collects here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also we have collaborators throughout the world, in different parts of the world and in different regions. And we also do on-site research in other countries. For example, we did research in Lebanon in a Shatil refugee camp in 2018. So this was a year into the museum's work. And you could say that, of course, some topics and some parts of the experiences, some layers of the experience are universal, sadly, of course, because war has its effects. It deprives people of safety and children of safety. It deprives them very often of food, of schooling, of education in general. It deprives them of free time, of free movement. So, of course, in many of the stories, you will see these intersections, whether they come from Syria or from Afghanistan or from Ukraine. There are similarities. But I would say that what stands out as one of the main differences in our collection, I would say, is the difference between being a refugee and staying in the country. We have a lot of objects in our collection from refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Eritrea, and they were collected mainly either in Lebanon, as I mentioned, or in refugee centers, temporary reception centers, as they call them, here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And these are the stories that are kind of one subtopic, whole subtopic to itself when it comes to these different layers and perspectives and zones of the experience, if I can say so. The War Childhood Museum has recognized that there are other subtopics that are very important to shed light on. So we have had a collaboration with the Srebrenica Memorial Center, in which we have co-created together with them and with the storytelling platform Humans of Amsterdam, an online exhibition, which is called Children and Genocide, and it's available still fully online. If you type in children and genocide, I'm typing it in the chat, and you search that either through Facebook or Instagram, you will be able to access full exhibition of those who have survived the genocide in Srebrenica as children. So we have recognized that this is a subtopic that is very important to research as well, and we have done so with the support of our partners. We have also created space and devoted time to present the experience of those who were children born of war. So together with some partnering organizations, the Wings of Hope and Children Born of War organization, we have also co-created an exhibition called Speaking Out. It's an exhibition that presents the experience of those who were as children or young adults who have survived sexual conflict-related sexual assault, or those who were born as children born of war as a result of conflict-related sexual violence. So when it comes to universalities in the topic, of course, there are some, but there are so many different subtopics which are more or less prevalent in certain parts of the world or certain areas, conflict areas in the world.
Exactly. Thank you. And Colleen has a question. She said, first of all, recognizing that the children today would have no memory of the war and shaping a museum for them is really groundbreaking. I agree. She said, we often don't see that in the world. Can you tell us what teachers bringing students to the museum? Are they mostly local? Are they regional? And I would add to that, do you see a difference in the reactions from people who are more local and of the experience, so to speak, than like tourists visiting?
Yes, of course. I will start with the part with the Colleen's question. So our museum, of course, has groups visiting of different age groups, and there are workshops, 2-hour workshops for different age groups, also standardized and continuously happening throughout the year for more than 6,000 children, out of which 2,500 also go through the workshop part and not just the visiting, the exhibition part. So they come from, of course, a large portion of them is from Sarajevo, but each year the museum writes at least one project and gets support from different stakeholders to bring in children from smaller communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, marginalized, those that are not close to the center, Sarajevo as a center of culture, or some other centers of culture throughout the country, as we find it very important for children to have access to this knowledge and to our exhibitions. And so they come from different parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have had some difficulties. Bosnia and Herzegovina is such a complex, post-conflict society, of course, and it has Republic of Srpska, and it has federation, and the federation has 10 cantons, and there are proportionally there are different members of the prevalent number of nationally there are different numbers of prevalent people living in certain towns. So we have had difficulties in working with children from Republic of Srpska because their Ministry of Education covers the whole region of Republic of Srpska, and it's not granting the children opportunity to come to the museum at all or to go through our educational activities. And we are happy and very proud that in the last years we have developed such good bonds with so many schools throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we get children from both towns with the majority of Bosniaks, as well as the towns with the majority of Croats that are now themselves calling us and setting up a visit, either a visit or a workshop plus a visit to the museum. So the museum is doing the hard work, but we are opening the community towards us. The community is opening to us to be more precise. So we're hoping in the next 5 years that it will happen with the Republic of Srpska. And we have some regional, of course, when schools have exchanges between themselves, we have regional visitors, and also some of them call us independently if they're visiting from Croatia mainly, or I think it was Croatia so far mostly, and they set up a visit and a workshop. So that was that part. And you asked about the reactions of the visitors. So the power of these stories in the museum is in their universality. Regardless of if you are a child, if you were a child during the war, or your life has been affected by war in any way, you can connect to these stories because essentially these are stories about love, about courage, about family, about support, about tolerance, about helping. These are very universal stories about a favorite toy. Who hasn't had a favorite toy in their life? So you can connect to the stories regardless of if you have been a child during the war or not. But of course, when somebody comes to our museum and has had the experience themselves, it can be, of course, triggering and psychologically triggering for them, or it can be especially emotional or hard or inspiring for them as well. Not to limit it just to negative emotions, but it can also show them that there is a visibility for their story. There is an opportunity for them to share. So it's a complex connection of these different reactions, emotions, and yeah, I think nobody goes out of the museum untouched in any way.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is, no, so if students here in the US are using, these activities, if their teachers are, I think they're definitely going to make those connections. When you showed that dress, my high school students had favorite outfits that they wore and felt good in. And I love the idea that, that young woman was able to use that dress as resistance. And it shows the power of some of these objects that seem like just simple everyday things, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. There are so many different objects in our collection. are connected to the stories of resilience, of strength, of hope, of courage. And this is especially important for children and youth who can very often feel very powerless when it comes to dealing with this topic, but in general, when it comes to talking about war, when it comes to coming up with the ways that they can fight against, negative events or destabilization in their country, or even some conflicting events in their countries. So these stories really serve as an inspiration or a guide for them, that they can always control themselves and their own reactions, and that they can find ways to actively help themselves or their communities. And this is something that is very important to bring into the picture when teaching children about these topics.
Great. Well, Merima, thank you so much for your time today. This has been wonderful. I think that a lot of teachers are going to be using those activities. It was so great seeing those. They're wonderful. And we just want to wish you continued success with your work at War Childhood Museum. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for being on with us today.
Thank you, Kim, for inviting the War Childhood Museum to present for this webinar, and for everyone participating. Thank you for your questions and for your attention. I hope that you have been inspired to use some of our materials. I'm sending also my email in the chat, so that you can, if you want, contact me if you have any questions, or you need help, or you would like to test out our activities and report back to me. So I'm sending it in the chat now, and thank you once again.
Great. And I will include that email in our follow-up email that you'll receive in the next few days, with the recording and a list of all of the resources. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.